Millionaire divorced his wife as Barren 7 years later. She shocked him with triplets at baby shower. Hi, my beautiful family. I speak to you today with a heart full of love, but also with truth. Our channel is built on your strength, your love, and your support. Every story I write is written with tears, with passion, and with prayer for each one of you. But my family, I see the channel going down because many forget to like, many forget to comment. It hurts me because it feels like my hard work is left unseen. I ask you today, not just as a creator, but as your brother who truly loves you, please whenever you watch, give your love back. A simple like, a simple comment keeps this family alive, keeps our light shining, and gives me the power to bring you more and more beautiful stories. May God bless every woman in this family with honor, with dignity, and with unshakable strength. May every man be blessed with wisdom and respect. May our children rise higher than mountains. And may every home be filled with endless love and peace. Amen. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write in the comment where you're watching from. The room was dripping with champagne-colored balloons and satin ribbons. The kind of baby shower you'd expect for someone rich, stylish, and smug about it. Guests laughed, cameras flashed, and every detail screamed perfect. But perfection has a funny way of cracking, because right in the middle of the speeches, right when the happy couple thought all eyes were on them, the doors opened, and in walked the last person anyone expected, his ex-wife. Not just any ex-wife. The one he'd thrown away 7 years ago. The woman he'd branded as barren, too broken to carry his children. The one he divorced without hesitation so he could find someone better. Only now, she wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was radiant, glowing in a way that stopped the room cold. And in her hands, an envelope. Inside, 3 glossy ultrasound photos, triplets. I swear, you could hear the gasp roll through the crowd like a wave. Whispers shot across the room. And him, Mr. Untouchable Millionaire, went pale. The man who used to tower over everyone with smug certainty suddenly looked very, very small. That moment wasn't just awkward, it was poetic. Like the universe itself had been quietly writing a punchline for years, waiting for the perfect stage. And now, here it was. A baby shower turned theater, with karma as the headliner. But before we dive into how we got there, let me set the record straight. This isn't some shallow story about exes bumping into each other. No, this is about betrayal, arrogance, and the quiet resilience of a woman who refused to stay broken. This is about a man who thought money and status made him untouchable, and how life loves to humble people like that in the most dramatic way possible. Because 7 years ago, this story didn't look like a setup for karma. Back then, it looked like heartbreak. It looked like cruelty packaged as logic. And it looked like a woman's entire world collapsing around her while her husband traded her in like last year's car model. And that's exactly where we're going to start. But hey, before I pull you into this saga, do me one favor. If you love stories where justice isn't just served, it's chilled and plated with silver, hit that subscribe button. These videos take hours to write, edit, and emotionally recover from. The second-hand rage alone could power a small city. So your support really does mean the world. Alright, deep breath. Let's rewind 7 years. Back to the $1 million mansion. Back to the marriage that looked picture perfect on Instagram, but was rotting at the core. Back to the moment she first realized her husband didn't see her as a partner anymore, just a defective piece of his empire. That's where this revenge story truly begins. For a while, it really did look like a fairy tale. She married the kind of man people whispered about at cocktail parties. A self-made millionaire with the confidence to match his bank account. Their house wasn't just big, it was the sort of mansion that sat on a hill, glaring down at the rest of the neighborhood. There were marble floors that echoed when you walked, chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a palace, and a garage lined with cars that cost more than most people's homes. Vacations, always first class. Italy for spring, Dubai in the summer, Aspen in the winter. And he made sure everyone saw it. Photos on social media, flashy gifts, endless talk about the perfect life he was building. And in those early years, Op believed it too. She believed him when he told her she was the missing piece to his empire. But perfection has cracks, and cracks always widen. It started small. Little comments about how their name needed to live on. Jokes that weren't really jokes about needing a son to carry the family line. At first, Op brushed them off. She wanted kids just as much as he did, so she thought they were on the same page. What she didn't realize was that for him, it wasn't about building a family, it was about building a legacy. Months of trying turned into years. The doctor appointments multiplied. Every test, every negative result chipped away at her. She cried in the bathroom more nights than she could count. But in front of him, she tried to stay hopeful. Maybe next month, she'd say with a shaky smile. His patience didn't last. The controlling side of him began to seep through the cracks. He scheduled appointments for her without asking. He questioned everything she ate, every workout, even how late she stayed up. It wasn't love, it was management, like she was just another project in his empire. And then came the words that still echoed in her mind long after he left. "You're barren." 2 words. Cold, sharp, and final. He spat them out in an argument one night, as if her worth had been boiled down to a single, missing ability. She froze, stunned, and instead of taking it back, he doubled down. He told her she was holding him back, that he needed someone who could give him the family he deserved. The cruelty didn't come in screams or fists. It came in dismissive sighs, in rolled eyes, in the way he told their friends it was such a tragedy that she couldn't have kids. He painted himself as the victim, the noble husband stuck with a wife who couldn't deliver. And people believed him, because he always knew how to spin a story. Meanwhile, Ob carried the shame like a scarlet letter. She blamed herself, even when doctors told her fertility was complicated and not always clear-cut. She wanted to fix it, to fix herself, just to keep his love. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about children anymore. It was about power, about control, about a man who only valued her as long as she fit his perfect picture. And the cruelest part, she still loved him. She wanted to believe he'd soften again, that the man who once swept her off her feet was still in there somewhere. But with every icy remark, every sarcastic jab, that man seemed further away. All that was left was someone who saw her not as a partner, but as a problem. Tell me, does that sound like love to you? Because here's the thing, real love doesn't come with conditions. Real love doesn't vanish the moment life gets messy. And yet, for him, the marriage was just another investment. And when the return didn't match his expectations, he was ready to cut his losses. Do you think true love should survive infertility struggles, or is that a deal breaker? Be honest, at this point, Op had no idea the divorce papers were coming. No idea how ruthless he was about to become. And no idea that the same man who threw her away would one day choke on his arrogance at the sight of her holding 3 little miracles. But that's still ahead. For now, all she knew was that her fairy tale was cracking and no amount of money, marble floors, or luxury cars could hide the truth. She was married to a man who loved the idea of a family more than he loved her, and that's when the unraveling truly began. The betrayal didn't come with shouting, or even with warning. It came in the form of a thick envelope left on the marble kitchen counter, her name typed neatly on the front, as if this were just another business deal. Divorce papers. She stared at them, numb. He wasn't even home when she opened them, just gone, like a man who'd already moved on in his mind. And when he finally returned that night, his explanation was as cold as the ink on those pages. "I need a real wife," he said flatly, pouring himself a drink as if he hadn't just detonated her entire world. "Someone who can give me children." "You can't." "I won't waste any more time." No apology, no compassion, just the cruel efficiency of a man cutting off a failing investment. She begged him to reconsider, not because she wanted to cling to someone so cruel, but because she couldn't make sense of it. How could years of love, years of building a life together be erased so easily? His only answer was a shrug and the reminder that she was the problem, not him. Within months, he was remarried. Just like that. The ink on their divorce papers was barely dry before he was parading a new woman around town, smiling for cameras, boasting about his second chance at a family. The arrogance was nauseating. To him, it wasn't betrayal, it was progress. He'd shed the broken wife and upgraded to a fertile model, and she was left in the ashes. The first few months were brutal. Nights blurred into mornings as she lay awake, replaying every cruel word, every moment she thought might have saved her marriage if only she'd done something differently. She stopped eating, she stopped smiling. Even breathing felt heavy. But grief has a strange rhythm. It suffocates you at first, then, little by little, it leaves gaps where the light can seep through. She started therapy. At first, she barely spoke, just cried into tissues while her therapist waited patiently. But over time, words came, anger came, and with it, clarity. She realized she hadn't failed as a wife, he had failed as a husband. She wasn't barren, she was abandoned. There's a difference, and once that truth settled in, something inside her shifted. She threw herself into work. She built her career from the ground up, earning respect not for who she was married to, but for her own talent and grit. She started traveling again, This time not to pose for his photos, but to see the world through her own eyes. Paris wasn't a backdrop for his success anymore, it was her adventure, her freedom. She found her voice too. For years, she'd been silenced by his shadow, forced to smile while he spoke for both of them. Now, she spoke for herself. At first, it was terrifying. Then it became intoxicating, and the years passed. The woman who once sat trembling over divorce papers was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and far more dangerous to his ego than he could ever imagine. She didn't just survive, she rebuilt. But let's pause for a second, because I want to ask you something. What's worse, being cheated on, or being abandoned for something out of your control? For Op, the answer didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she had clawed her way out of the wreckage and created a life no one could take credit for but her. Meanwhile, the man who left her for better prospects thought he'd won. He thought he'd erased her from his story. What he didn't realize was that her story was just getting started. And fate has a wicked sense of humor, because the woman he called Barren, the woman he discarded like a defective product, she was about to walk back into his life in the most spectacular, humiliating way possible. But that, my friends, is still to come. For a long time, Op swore she'd never let anyone in again, not after what she'd been through. Love, to her, felt like a loaded weapon, one that could turn against her at any moment. But then she met Daniel. He wasn't flashy. He didn't arrive in a sports car or sweep her off to Paris on their first date. He was ordinary, in the best possible way. A steady presence, with kind eyes and a voice that never rose in anger. He didn't need to impress her with wealth, he impressed her with consistency. He listened, really listened. When she talked about her day, he didn't check his watch or reach for his phone. When she told him about the scars of her past, he didn't try to fix her. He just held her hand and let her feel safe in her own silence. That was new. That was everything, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. Dating him was like relearning how to breathe. Simple things, making dinner together, going for walks, laughing over spilled coffee felt magical because they weren't built on performance or pressure. They were built on care, on respect, and slowly, without even realizing it, she let her guard down. Months turned into a year, and the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. One evening, sitting across from him at their favorite little diner, she caught herself smiling in a way she hadn't in years. Not forced, not for show, just real, and she realized this was love. Not the glossy, magazine cover kind she'd once been sold, but the kind that sneaks up on you in the quiet moments and stays when life gets messy. Then came the twist she never thought possible. It started with exhaustion. She brushed it off as stress from work. Then came the nausea. She laughed it away, saying it was bad takeout. But when she missed a cycle, her heart pounded in her chest. She took the test, hands trembling, breath caught in her throat. Positive. She froze, staring at the result like it couldn't possibly be real. After years of being told she was barren, of crying in sterile doctors' offices, of watching her ex smirk as he called her defective, here it was. Proof. Daniel found her sitting on the bathroom floor, test clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at him, terrified. "I don't believe it," she whispered, and he knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms, his voice steady. "Then we'll believe it together." Weeks later, an ultrasound confirmed what still felt like a dream. But it wasn't just one heartbeat. It was 3 triplets. The nurse grinned as she turned the screen toward them, the steady thrum of 3 tiny lives filling the room. Op laughed through tears, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. Daniel squeezed her hand so tightly she thought he might never let go. Against all odds, the woman who had been branded barren was carrying not just one miracle, but 3. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. Late at night, lying in bed, she would place her hand over her stomach and feel the weight of it all. Not just the babies growing inside her, but the vindication, the truth. She had never been broken. She had never been the problem. And while she didn't plan her life around revenge, part of her couldn't ignore the irony. Fate had a way of writing its own punchlines, because somewhere out there, her ex-husband was living his picture-perfect life, certain he'd erased her from his story. He had no idea what was coming. No idea that the woman he discarded as barren was carrying a secret that would shatter the smug little empire he'd built. But Op didn't dwell on him. Not yet. She focused on the joy in front of her, the steady love of Daniel, the miracle of the babies, the peace she'd fought so hard to find. Still, she couldn't shake one thought. Little did I know, fate had one last stage prepared for my ex-husband. The baby shower wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was supposed to be joyful, loud, and maybe a little tacky. The way those things usually are when friends get too excited with balloons and Pinterest boards. It was held at this gorgeous rented hall, streamers everywhere. Pastel tables lined with gifts, a dessert spread that looked almost too perfect to eat. People buzzing, laughter spilling out into the parking lot before you even stepped inside. For Op, it was surreal. After years of being told she'd never get here, she was walking into a celebration for her babies. Not one, not two, but three. She dressed in soft lavender, a glow on her face that no amount of money or luxury could fake. In her hand, tucked neatly against her clutch, were the ultrasound photos. Her heart pounded as the doors opened. All eyes turned toward her. The room gasped, not in judgment, but in awe. Some clapped, some pressed their hands to their mouths. Others leaned closer to each other, already whispering. She smiled, quiet, composed, radiant, and then fate's cruel joke. Or maybe fate's perfect punchline. She saw him, her ex-husband, sitting at a table with his new wife. The same man who once tossed divorce papers at her like she was nothing more than a failed investment. The same man who paraded around town, gloating about his fresh start. He hadn't expected her here. Not like this. His face drained of color instantly. It was like watching someone's ego collapse in real time. 1 second smug, untouchable. The next, frozen. His hand tightened around his glass, knuckles white, as if that stem of champagne could anchor him in a room suddenly spinning. And oh, the whispers. They spread like wildfire. That's her. The ex-wife, right? Didn't he say she couldn't? Wait, triplets. Every head turned toward him, then back to her, the math clicking in their minds faster than he could spin a story. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked slowly, gracefully, to the center of the room. She thanked the hosts, hugged a few friends, laughed as people gushed over her bump. And then, at just the right moment, she held up the ultrasound strip for a small cluster of women who squealed loud enough for the entire hall to hear. 3 perfect little outlines. 3 undeniable truths. The sound rippled through the crowd. A gasp here, a laugh there. The ex's new wife leaned closer to him, whispering something sharp, her face stiff with confusion or maybe embarrassment. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because what could he say? That the woman he labeled Barren was carrying 3 miracles? That he'd built his new marriage on a lie he'd written about her? His silence said more than any excuse ever could. Op, meanwhile, didn't even glance his way. That was the beauty of it. She carried herself with a confidence so effortless, it stung sharper than any direct insult. She posed for pictures, let her friends fuss over her, accepted gifts with gratitude. She laughed, she ate, she lived. And all the while, her ex sat in the corner, unraveling, invisible, and yet entirely exposed. Some people asked her privately if she'd known he'd be there. She hadn't. The world was just small enough and karma was just thorough enough to script this twist for her. And truly, she didn't need to confront him. His expression was confrontation enough. His silence, his paling skin, the way he avoided eye contact with anyone who might question him, that was justice. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's not even intentional. Sometimes it's just living so fully, so happily, that the person who tried to break you has to sit there and watch you shine. At the end of the shower, Up left with her arms full of gifts, her heart light. She didn't once look back at him, and that was the real dagger. Not her anger, not her pain, but her peace. She had walked into the room carrying proof of her new life, her second chance, her joy. He had walked out carrying nothing but the weight of his own arrogance. So I'll ask you, if you were in Op's shoes, would you have confronted him directly, spilled every bitter word you ever swallowed, or would you have done exactly what she did? Would you have let the moment speak for itself? Because sometimes silence is the loudest revenge of all. After the baby shower, the gossip spread faster than champagne bubbles. By the next morning, everyone who mattered in his world had heard the story. The ex-wife he discarded as Barren was expecting. Triplets. It wasn't just shocking, it was humiliating. Business associates who once toasted his fresh start now exchanged knowing looks when his name came up. The very people he bragged to about trading up for a fertile wife, they suddenly remembered how cruel, how smug he'd been. And now, every word tasted bitter with irony. His new wife didn't take it well, either. Imagine walking into a party as the upgrade, only to leave as the punchline. Friends said she stormed out before dessert was even served, her face tight with fury. Whispers hinted she started questioning everything. If Op wasn't truly Barren, then what exactly had he told her to justify his divorce? Behind the scenes, his reputation cracked like glass under pressure. Deals he thought were locked and stalled. Invitations dried up. Even family, the same family that once pressured him about heirs, shifted their sympathy to Op. They saw her glowing with new life, strong and serene, while he looked like a man shrinking in his own shadow. And here's the kicker, he tried to reach out, the messages started small. A polite, "Congratulations, I heard the news." Then longer ones, "Maybe we could talk sometime, clear the air," and eventually, desperation, "I made mistakes. I'd like to make things right." She read them, and then she did. Nothing, not a word, not a reply, just silence, because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon of all. Imagine being him, once so sure of his superiority, now left shouting into a void where his ex-wife used to be. He wanted a reaction, any reaction. He got nothing, and that nothing echoed louder than any insult could have. Meanwhile, Op kept moving forward. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't plotting, she was simply living her life, planning a nursery, decorating with soft yellows and greens, folding tiny clothes, practicing breathing exercises. Her revenge wasn't some elaborate scheme, it was joy, peace, the family she'd been denied, finally becoming real. Friends told her about the fallout, about his embarrassment, his crumbling marriage, his desperate attempts to rewrite the past. She listened politely, maybe even smiled faintly, but she never indulged. She didn't need to, because true revenge isn't proving someone wrong, it's not even making them suffer. True revenge is thriving so fully that their opinion no longer matters. And that's exactly what she did. So, let me throw this question to you, do you think Op should have said something to him? Or was silence the ultimate mic drop? For me, silence won. Every time, her ex wanted to control the narrative. He wanted the last word. Instead, the last word was her laughter at a baby shower, the gasp of a crowd holding ultrasound photos, the quiet power of a woman who refused to be broken, and him? He was left with whispers, sideways glances, and a legacy of his own making, not the empire builder with heirs he imagined, but the man who traded love for arrogance and lost everything anyway. In the end, Op didn't just get her revenge, she got her life back. And sometimes, that's the sweetest ending of all. It arrived on a Tuesday, a thick cream envelope with his handwriting scrawled across the front, familiar, but shakier than I remembered. For a moment, I just stared at it, unmoving. Funny how so inside was a letter. Long, rambling, desperate. He wrote about regret, about not knowing what he had until it was gone. He tried to twist the story, to paint himself as a man blinded by ambition, pressured by legacy, and my favorite line, a victim of circumstances. Victim? Really? This was the same man who called me Barren. The same man who signed divorce papers without a blink, then flaunted his new wife like a trophy. And now, because life dealt him a little humiliation, suddenly he was the wounded one. I kept reading. He begged for forgiveness, claimed he'd always loved me, even when his actions screamed otherwise. He wrote about wishing things could have been different, as if those words could erase years of cruelty. At one point, he even asked if we could meet for closure. Closure for him, not for me. And for a second, I laughed out loud, because this letter wasn't about love. It wasn't even about me. It was about his pride, about the image he'd built for himself that had come crashing down, leaving him exposed and desperate to patch the cracks. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it in a drawer. Then I walked away. No reply. No angry words. No chance for him to twist my silence into some kind of victory. Because here's the truth, I didn't need to say anything. He already knew. He saw it on my face at that baby shower. He felt it in every whisper behind his back. And now, he had to live with it alone, unanswered. Sometimes silence says more than any apology ever could. That letter sits there even now, tucked away, untouched. Not because I treasure it, but because it reminds me of how far I've come. I don't need revenge spelled out in angry words or dramatic confrontations. My life speaks louder. My children speak louder. My happiness speaks louder. And him? He's just ink on paper. A man trapped in the ruins of his own choices, begging for an audience I'll never grant. That, I think, is the final justice. Life after the letter didn't revolve around him. In fact, he faded so far into the background that he became nothing more than a shadow, a ghost I barely remembered, because my days were full now. Full in ways I'd once only dreamed of. 3 tiny voices. 3 sets of little hands clutching at mine. 3 reasons to wake up exhausted, but grateful beyond words. The triplets weren't just babies, they were miracles stitched together from hope, resilience, and a dash of poetic justice. And then there was him, my partner. Not a millionaire. Not a man obsessed with legacy or appearances. Just steady, gentle. The kind of person who held bottles at AM without complaint. Who laughed when one baby's cry set off the others. Who kissed my forehead when I looked like I hadn't slept in a week. With him, I never felt less than. I felt whole. Seen. Loved without conditions. And that changed me. I used to think survival was enough to crawl out of the rubble my ex left me in and just breathe again. But I didn't just survive. I thrived. I built a life richer than any mansion, fuller than any bank account. Meanwhile, my ex, well, he stayed trapped in his own shallow choices. His second marriage fractured under the same weight of arrogance that crushed our first. Friends drifted, respect evaporated, and he was left with the one thing he thought he'd never have to face: irrelevance. But by then, I wasn't even watching. Because healing isn't keeping score. It's realizing you no longer care about the score at all. I looked at my children and saw the proof that his cruel words had been lies. I looked at my partner and saw what true love actually looked like: not diamonds, not private jets, but quiet devotion at AM. And I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who refused to let bitterness write her ending. That's the real revenge, isn't it? Not screaming, not public takedowns, just joy. Quiet, unstoppable joy. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's living the life they swore you never could. And in that sense, I'd already won. And that's how the story came full circle. The woman once labeled barren now rocks 3 healthy babies to sleep every night. She laughs, she loves, she thrives. Meanwhile, the millionaire who tossed her aside like a broken accessory, he's left standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, watching from the sidelines as the life he thought impossible blooms without him. It's poetic, really. He had money, power, influence, yet none of it could save him from the weight of his own choices. She had pain, heartbreak, and every reason to give up. Instead, she found strength. And in the end, that strength built something money could never buy: a family, a home, a happiness so bright it made his world look dim. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, showing up years later in the sweetest, most undeniable way. And honestly, that's what makes stories like this so cathartic. Because it reminds us that arrogance has an expiration date, and kindness, quiet resilience always outlasts it. So, what do you think? Was this the ultimate example of life writing its own karma? Or would you have wanted her to do more, to confront him, to say the words he deserved to hear? Either way, I think we can agree she didn't just win. She lived. If you found this story as cathartic as I did, please hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe. These scripts take hours to write, sift through, and polish, and your support is what keeps us going. Until next time, may your karma always arrive right on schedule.